Merry Christmas, everyone. My name is Tony Katko. I'm one of the pastors here at Christ Church, and I just want to say that no matter what has brought you here, whether you are a family, friend, member, visitor, whatever it is, we are glad to have you here as we worship together this Christmas Eve. So there's something I noticed in one of our preschool classrooms before they went out on break last week. One of the teachers had asked them what they knew about baby Jesus, and they wrote down all the answers on a poster. So I wanted to share some of these insights from some of our preschoolers. What do you know about baby Jesus? The first person said, he was born, which is why we're here. This is it. Yeah, good job. The next answer, the kings come to baby Jesus. They say a baby is coming. Again, good, paying attention, yeah. The next one, he gets a Christmas tree. And I understand where that comes from, right? We're here to celebrate the birth of Jesus, and then we put up Christmas trees, so it makes sense those would be gifts to Jesus, yeah. This next one, I'm not sure where it comes from. Carry him around this room, and he rolls around like a penguin. His dad looked at that poster and said, I have no idea where that came from. And this next one is really great. When I'm 4 years old, I will know. Don't you love that confidence? Like, I don't know right now, but at some point, specifically next year, I'm going to know everything about Jesus. And then this last one really takes the cake. Elsa and Anna from the Frozen universe. Elsa and Anna know a lot about Jesus. They keep it a secret, and they don't tell anyone about Jesus until Christmas. I don't know where that came from, but it's great. I love the connections that these young minds make. But the reason I share these with you, besides the fact that they're adorable and they need to be shared, is that when it comes to this Christmas story, the story itself, we get to a point in our lives where we think we've got it all figured out. We've hit that 4-year-old mark, right? So we're good. We know everything about the Christmas story and baby Jesus. Because the reality is, even if you're not really that involved in church, you've heard the Christmas story. You've heard it in carols, at least in the Charlie Brown Christmas special, in pageants, and the occasional Christmas Eve service. And so when we come to listening to that actual story itself, we're tempted to check out because we think we've already known, we've got it all figured out, right? Well, first of all, what I found is some of the power of the Bible in general is this story, like all the stories, there is always something else going on here. There's always something deeper below the surface in these stories in our scripture. That's part of what gives them such power. But I know there's this other reality that many people hear the story of Christmas or any story from the Bible, and they say, well, that's a nice story, but that's it. It's just a nice story. I have a hard time seeing how something that happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away kind of thing, how that really impacts our lives here today. And I get that. I get why people think that. But it matters. It matters because God's story is not done yet. That same story that was unfolding a little over 2,000 years ago is still unfolding in us this night, here and now. Tanya Marlowe is a Christian theologian and author and blogger, and I got to hear her at a conference this year. And she was talking about how people today, Christians, have a hard time figuring out what to do with the Bible, with a lot of these stories. What do we do with them? How does that fit with life today? And here's what she said. It stuck with me. Retell the story of God as though we're in it, because we are. Retell the story of God as though we're in it, because we are. So here's what happens when we retell the story of Christmas as though we're in it, because we are in it. Imagine that you are a Jewish peasant living in the Middle East a little over 2,000 years ago. Imagine that is you. Well, if that is you, then it is a dark time. It's a dark time for any peasants living under the occupation of the Roman Empire, but especially for people who were Jewish, you see, because part of your faith told you from a very young age that your people were supposed to be for something special. God made you to be a light to all other nations, to be a blessing for the rest of the world. And when your ancestors were living as slaves under the might of the Egyptian Empire, God did the unimaginable and set them free. And eventually they were able to build a kingdom of their own. And then God promised one of your kings, one of your ancestors' kings, David, that his line would last forever, that his kingdom would never end. And then it did. It looked like that royal line was broken, even though God said it would never be broken. Because the reality is that when your ancestors built their kingdom, it wasn't long before they turned away from God. They forgot about their calling in the first place, to be an example, a shining light to others in the world. They neglected taking care of the most vulnerable, the poor, the widows, the orphans, and the foreigners, looking out only for their own self-interests. They started acting, in other words, like everyone else. And so since your ancestors wanted to be like another empire, God let them contend with those empires, and they were conquered and ruled by the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, and finally now it's the Romans. So if you are a Jewish peasant living 2,000 years ago, you are losing hope because it has been a long time since your people have known freedom. But there's another part of this story, a part of our story, which explains why there's even a different level of despair and darkness going on. You see, imagine that your faith and your community told you stories from the time you were very young about how God spoke to your ancestors, and God did all these things through them in the world to make the world a better place. And then you get older, and it starts to feel like those stories are kind of far off, and they happened a long time ago. And you start to wonder, is God done speaking? Is God done working? Or maybe you wonder, well, maybe was God ever actually speaking or working in the world in the first place? Maybe we're just on our own. That is the dark reality, the setting of our Christmas story where Jesus comes into the world. And I don't think it's that hard to see how that connects with our world today. If you have ever wondered if God is done speaking, then you are a part of this story. If you have ever wondered if God was ever really working or speaking in the first place, you are a part of this story. If you just need some hope, you are a part of this story. You know, in the past few weeks, with everything that's going on in our national political realm, and especially with the impeachment, it is so painfully obvious how deeply divided we are as a country. This deep-seated mistrust for one another, even our neighbors. Many of us are scared that, well, maybe our democracy or just our basic human decency as a society isn't as stable as we thought it was, and maybe we're spiraling down to something else. So in the middle of this political reality, and in a time where we have numbed ourselves out of necessity to the horrors of things like mass shootings, and when we are in an epidemic of depression and mental health, because there are twice as many suicides as there are homicides in our country today. If you think there is too much darkness in the world and too much despair, you are not alone, and you are a part of this Christmas story. So think what happens in the story. Well, the first kid had it right. He was born. God was born, came to earth as a baby, as one of us. John's gospel that Pastor Tim just read puts it this way: in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. What happened? In a dark and broken world full of despair, God came into that world as one of us to show us that God is never giving up on us. God is in there with us through all of our joys and all of our pain. No matter how bad and how dark things get, God will never abandon us. That was true for Jewish peasants living under the occupation of the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, and it's true for us today also. So let's take a closer look at that Christmas story as told by Luke. There's something in here that might surprise you, that changes the way we look at this nativity scene a little bit. So Luke starts by telling us that the emperor of Rome, Caesar Augustus, ordered a census be taken throughout the Roman world. So everyone had to go to their hometown to register for that census. I'm going to read from the NIV translation. You'll see why that matters later. So here's verse 4. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. Joseph and Mary lived in a small rural town in Nazareth, but because of the census, they went up to Bethlehem. Why? Because that was Joseph's hometown. His family was from there. He still had family there in Bethlehem. And then we continue in verse 5 and 6. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. Now here is where it gets interesting. Verse 7 in NIV. And she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. Now, wait a minute. Everyone knows that that's not how the story goes, right? Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem, and there was no room for them in the inn. That's right. Everyone knows that's how the story goes. It's not a guest room. Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem, and the innkeeper was there and said, sorry, we're all full. And then they walked around the rest of the city. There was no place for them to stay except for a barn, and there were only animals there. And so that's where Mary gave birth to Jesus, just with Joseph and other animals. That's how it happened. So why would this most recent update of the NIV change that inn to guest room? Well, I'm sorry, folks, but that story of them going to an inn and then to a barn isn't what actually happened here. You see, when Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem, they would not have gone to an inn. Actually, some scholars argue that Bethlehem at this time in history was not even large enough to support a commercial inn. There may not have even been an inn in Bethlehem. But even if there was an inn, they would not have had to go there. Why? Because Bethlehem was Joseph's hometown. He had family there that he could stay with. And even if he didn't, he was from the line of David, in David's city. He was well respected and known because of that. And besides, you have to understand that in the Middle East, still today, but especially then, culturally speaking, hospitality was much more important than it is for us today. See, the idea was that it brought honor to your entire household to let someone stay as a guest in your home, even if it was someone you didn't know who was passing through. And it brought incredible shame to your home if you neglected that hospitality, if you did not offer a place for someone to stay. In fact, hospitality was so important in that time that even in simple peasant households where most people lived, there were two rooms, one large main room for the whole family to stay in together and sleep together, and then a separate room just for guests. And that guest room, in Greek, the language of the New Testament, is called a kataluma. There is a different word for a commercial inn, but that's not what's used here. In chapter 2, verse 7 of Luke, it's that kataluma. In fact, the only other place that same word is used in the New Testament was when it talks about the Last Supper, when Jesus and the disciples were in an upper room, in a guest room of a private home, not in an inn. So back to this peasant home. If you were living in a regular, simple Jewish peasant home in the Middle East, they had 2 rooms, right? And if you had any animals, they would stay outside during the day, but at night, you always brought them into your house. They would sleep in the main room with the rest of the family. Now, if you're thinking, that sounds kind of smelly and messy, well, yeah. Guess what? Life in the ancient world was smelly and messy, especially if you were a peasant. But it was worth it for them, first of all, because having the animals in there at night added extra body heat. It helped you to stay warm. But the most important reason was that your livestock were the most valuable resource that you had. You would not, as you were sleeping, leave them tied up outside or someplace away from you. You wanted them right there with you so they would be safe, so that no one could steal them. So when you had these households with the animals, you would tie them up on one side of the household, and usually they built them into caves and there was a slope. They would put the animals on the downside of the slope by the door so you could clean out all the animal mess in the morning. And they would also carve little divots into the stone walls there to make troughs or mangers, and then they would put hay in those mangers for the animals to eat at night. That is how a normal home was set up in the Middle East. And then when a peasant woman gave birth, where did it happen? Certainly not in a hospital. That's a very recent invention, right? No, it happened in the main room of the home where they did everything. And there were always skilled women around to help other women give birth, midwives, if they were formally called that or not. And after the baby was born, in that room of their household, they would wrap them in cloth, swaddle them, just like we swaddle babies today. And then they would clean out one of those mangers and then put some fresh hay and lay the baby in that manger to sleep at night. That is how most Jewish peasants were born. That's how they came into the world. So think of the Christmas story. When Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem, they did not look for an inn. They were invited into someone's home. Probably a relative of Joseph's because he had family there. But there were so many people there because of the census going on that their kataluma, their guest room, was already full. There was no room in their guest room. And so what happened? The family graciously invited this pregnant teenage woman and her fiancé to stay with them in their main room of the house, to sleep with the rest of the family as if she and he were one of them. I think it's kind of funny that we picture before Jesus was born, Mary and Joseph were alone. They weren't alone. There were lots of people in town, lots of people around. In fact, I'm guessing that from Mary's perspective, there were probably too many helpful in-laws around when she was having to give birth. That's my guess anyway. So when Mary gave birth to Jesus, what happened? They cleaned out the manger and they put some fresh hay there. She swaddled her baby Jesus in those cloths and laid him down in that manger to sleep, the same way that that family had once laid their children in the same manger to sleep. So why does it matter, though? Why does it matter that Jesus was born in the main room of a peasant household? Because it was a sign. That was the sign for the shepherds. It was a sign that the good news of God is really for all people, even for them. You see, shepherds back in this time were not respected. That was not a high-class kind of job. Because people, when they saw that these are people who went and worked out in the fields all day and night with animals, not around other people, there was a reason for that. Because they couldn't cut it working in jobs around other people. That's what people thought. They looked down on shepherds. Shepherds were not a part of decent society. So then the angels come to the shepherds to announce this good, great news that the Messiah is born, and it's good news for all people. Now, if the angels would have said, now go and find the baby, it'll be in the throne room of the first castle on the left, the shepherds never would have gone there because they wouldn't have been let through the front door. That's why the angel said, look, this is the sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth lying in a manger. In the same way that you were born, the same way that maybe your children would be born. These shepherds knew that this Messiah was born in a normal peasant household, the one place where they actually might be welcomed into the door. See, that's the incredible good news of this story, is that God comes into this world with us and for us, but not just some of us, all of us. God's good news is not just for people who are respectable and have their lives together, not just for people with good careers and clean records and a good, wholesome family. God came into the world for everyone, even the shepherds, even the people that we look down on in life, and even you and me. So may you know this Christmas that you are a part of this story that is still unfolding in us today. And no matter what's going on in your life, no matter how dark the world seems, God is here with us. God is not giving up on us. So may we know God's love for us. And may we show that love to all people, no exceptions. Amen.